This is the 14th time that I've made a presentation from this stage. So much has changed since then, not to mention the incredible changes in society since I founded our Greenberg Associates about 40 years ago. Disruption, quote unquote, has become a sort of meaningless word, but as someone who's worked through the major disruptions in our industry with technology and communications, I can assure you it's not meaningless. In the mid-90s, Art Greenberg was doing a great business in film, CG, computer graphics, and production. But when I saw the disruption of the internet begin to show up, I realized that I had to change in order to stay relevant. And let me tell you personally, that was extremely difficult to do. Disrupting our thriving special effects production model meant abandoning a successful business where nearly all our staff couldn't reorient and they didn't join me in the next phase. Self-disruption would become a driving force of RGA as we reinvented ourselves so many times that I can confidently say, as a company, we've never been disrupted. That's in 40 years. It's meant repeatedly rethinking our model when we're at our most successful. And last year was our most successful year, as an example, and these 2 quarters are our most successful this year. Because the time to change is when you're at the height of your success. The latest shift around this past summer, our best year ever, seemed to me like it's the start of the deconstruction of our industry. And I know that's a big statement. But we've created a model flexible enough that we don't need to completely reboot the company to survive themes that happened in the mid-90s. That model is what we'll talk about today. In today's presentation, I'm going to give you a point of view, or we are, of our challenges facing the industry, explain how we've modeled and remodeled RGA to disrupt these forces rather than be disrupted. And we'll show a few case studies of the work that we've done that's relevant. We've always tried to be transparent and share our model with the industry at large. There's absolutely nothing that we don't show or talk about except for the confidential work of our clients. So let's get started. I'd like to introduce Barry Waxman. He's the Global Chief Strategy Officer for RGA. Nick Law, who's our Vice Chairman and Global Chief Creative Officer. And Sunil, who's our Senior Vice President and Global Head of Consulting. So, Barry, thank you.
Thank you, Bob. So I want to start off by talking about our clients, because probably like many of you in the audience who work in agencies, almost all of them are big Fortune 500 companies, and they are in mature categories, mature industries, hyper-competitive. They're battling it out every day with their competitors to gain little tiny 4 or 5% in a good year growth. And inevitably, within that same industry, there's some disruptively innovative company that seems to be playing a completely different game and winning. And so oftentimes when you read the headlines about what's happening in the industry, it seems pretty dire. I'm using the automotive industry as an example, but we could have used retail or CPG or telecoms. And when you read the headlines, it almost looks like the sky's falling. But then there's this alternate universe that seems to be happening somewhere else, and the story's playing out quite different. And in that universe, you see a guy like the guy here get on a stage, and he's introducing a new model of a car. And this is a car that's not even going to be available for 2 years. And within 36 hours, he goes on to sell 276,000 of them. And within 3 months, he sold 400,000. And when you ask that guy what business he's in, he doesn't even think that he's in the car business. He actually believes that he's in the business of saving the planet. And his company includes far more than cars. It has solar panels, lithium-ion batteries, something called a gigafactory, which nobody had ever heard of until he decided to invent it. And so it often feels as if there's this asymmetrical battle going on between these disruptive innovators and the mature clients that many of us have to work on behalf. So the challenge is how can we help them innovate? Now also, the other thing to note is that the other guy seems to be winning with almost no advertising. He doesn't have to spend anything on ads. There's a famous quote from Jeff Bezos from many years ago where he once said that advertising is a tax you have to pay for lack of innovation. Now our industry as a whole, we've been obsessed over the same 5 things for the last 50 years. And we spend billions upon billions on ads. So there's 5 things. These come from Forrester, by the way, so I didn't make these up. This is based on their analysis of hundreds and hundreds of companies that they follow. So it's things like, what's my brand story? What's my offer that's going to drive a purchase? How much media and what kind should I be buying? How many impressions did I drive? And then one I've added, what's the new flavor, color, formulation that's going to unlock a new customer segment? And all of us in this room have been in meetings with clients where these are the topics that they want to talk about. The disruptive innovators have a completely different list of obsessions. And it starts with things like, what is my brand promise? How do I demonstrate that everywhere? How do I use my brand to solve my customers' problems? How do I make it easy to transact with my brand? What are my sources of data, and how can I use them to completely customize and personalize my customer experience of my brand? And then lastly, and there still is a role for advertising and communication, but it has to be thought of differently, which is how is my brand going to relevantly and authentically behave in a culture that's been thoroughly disrupted by social media? Now, the thing that's been going on, and the reason the technology disruptors are even able to do what they're doing, disrupt these industries, is because all of us that have been alive to this day have been witness to a massive transformation in humanity. And it's this shift to what we call media habits. And the entire advertising business was built on the back of these media habits that we created work on top of. And we've seen this shift from the media habits of old to what we call technology habits. Every single technology disruptor, every innovative disruptor has created some form of a new technology habit that consumers are adopting. And it's in the adoption of these new technologies that innovation and disruption are happening for our clients. So what's critical about this shift is that technology habits yield data. And data is emerging as the currency of our smart connected age. And it's not just the currency, it's also turning out to be the fuel for the engine. And the companies that have data are going to be the ones that win going forward, and the ones that lack the data and don't know what to do with it are going to be the ones that don't win. Just looking back at 2001, these were the 5 companies that were rated the most valuable in the world at the time. And you can see they were all dominant in their respective industries, but almost none of them had any data, or if they did, they didn't really do much with it. And you compare that just 16 years later to the 5 companies that are the most valuable today, and I think we would all agree that these are the 5 behemoths of data. Not only do they have a ton of data, but they use that data to shape the customer experience of their brand. And so at every level of our economy, there are these disruptive innovators. It's not just with those behemoths that serve over 1 billion consumers. It's happening at lower levels, companies that have 100 million or so consumers, and even ones that are single-digit millions of consumers. These are the disruptive innovators that are playing a different set of rules and winning the game against the established competition. So as we look at them, I think that there's a commonality among them. There's almost a playbook that's emerged that defines all of them that's common across them, even though they're different. And I'm going to go through the playbook. There's 6 parts to it, and I'm going to use Nike as a little bit of imagery in the background. It's a client that's near and dear to our hearts. But I think Nike is also a great example because it's a company that did manage to transform itself, did manage to go from potentially being disrupted to becoming a disruptive innovator. So let's go through the 6. Number 1, it starts with this idea of having an inspiring brand purpose, something that can motivate the consumer, that captures their hearts and minds. Number 2, it's using innovation to deliver on that brand purpose. And what I mean by that is what I said a few minutes ago. It's about creating new technology habits using innovation that our consumers adopt that deliver on that brand purpose. So it's not this idea of just do it for Nike, it's this idea of help me do it, using technology to do that. The third thing is that their products start to connect together using services to create what we call an ecosystem. They're not just selling myriad of different models of shoes or apparel. They're connecting these things together in a way where consumers find a stickiness within what we call an ecosystem. The fourth part is that if we are creating technology habits, those technology habits live in interfaces and they live in experience. So design is critical to the technology, the disruptive innovators. It's at the heart of everything that they do. The fifth part is that they're using data to transform the customer experience, moving away from this idea of consumers or even users and elevating it to this idea of membership, that if we have all this data about you, we better be able to do something that is relevant for you. And the last one, and there still is, of course, a role for communications and advertising, but it has to be completely rethought because culture today has been transformed from the bottom up, and our brands need to authentically and relevantly behave in that world. And so these are the 6 things that have come together as the modern playbook of the disruptive innovator. So you can see in the 6 things that if you want to be the partner that's going to help clients going forward achieve this playbook, it certainly transcends the idea that all we do is make ads. There's many more elements that a relevant partner would need to make. It requires a new model, a new set of capabilities. There's going to be a lot of companies who are going to be working on some new model to go after that new playbook. And all of them are going to be a little bit differently. But we're going to show our model. It's probably going to look something like this. We have 6 pieces to our model. We've been building this out since about 2012. We decided to disrupt our own business. And it includes things like studios and a connected workspace practice that's all about boosting productivity. We've created some software around which we have IP. But we're going to focus today on that top row, ventures, consulting, and the agency business. Because we had to reinvent all 3 of those things. We had to get into businesses that we weren't even in 5 years ago. And along the way, we found interesting opportunities for us to disrupt industries that we weren't even participants in. So let's start off with ventures. RGA Ventures was started in 2013, so we're coming up on our 4th anniversary in August. That was when we announced our first program. And we saw this rather unique opportunity to disrupt a massive industry, which is the VC industry, venture capital. And our ambition at the time was to help clients innovate. We saw that there was a pathway, that any idea that we could come up with for a client, any new innovation, quite likely there was a startup that was already working on that innovation. And if we could connect the 2 together early on, we could help them jumpstart innovation. Now, when you look at the VC business, you see how enormous it is. It's far larger than all the holding companies combined. $80 billion a year invested in startups over the last 5 years on average. But the dirty secret of that business is that it's mostly based on failure. 19 out of 20 companies that VCs invest in ultimately fail. How can you change the dynamic, even just to go from 1 out of 20 successes to 2 or maybe 3? And when you peel back a little bit into it and you read into what's going on, you find out that the reason these startups are failing is not because of lack of good ideas, it's because of execution. With their limited budgets, their limited amount of money that they've raised, and their small teams, their ability to execute is greatly hampered versus, say, a Fortune 500 company. So we saw this rather interesting model that we could put together that could disrupt the VC industry. So the first thing is that we start with financial capital. Money is something that all startups need. And that's something that's not new. That's always been around. But we add to it 2 new things. One is what we call creative capital. What if they had access to the talents of a world-class company like RGA with all the work that we do for Fortune 500 companies that they could never afford previously? And then the third thing that we bring to the table is we've got a lot of clients. And our clients can help shape their products, can help them pilot things, could maybe invest in a startup, or maybe even acquire it. So this access to clients has become critical. So that's the formula for disrupting the VC business, is financial capital plus creative plus client relationships. Now, we structured our program along the lines of accelerators. We've done a pretty long list. We're currently in the one that's 3rd from the bottom, the Marketing Tech Venture Studio, which is being sponsored by Snapchat's parent, Snap Inc. Some of you might have seen those companies yesterday on the Lions Innovation stage. They were here giving a presentation. When we get back to New York, we'll start our program with Verizon Ventures. And so we're getting pretty mature. We've done a lot of programs. Now, we work on behalf of corporate partners. They're the ones who pay for this. They sponsor these programs, and they pay RG a fee to run them on their behalf. And their ambition is obviously to get a lens into what's happening in the startup world, but also to find companies that they can find innovation with. Now, we've accelerated over 73 companies so far, and we have, by the end of the year, ambition to have over 100. We have equity stakes in all of these companies. And many of them have gone on to raise a significant amount of money. You can see from the list here, this would be the envy of a lot of VCs, with companies reaching this level of maturity, being ripe for acquisition and for a monetization event. Now, last year we did a program in commerce with Westfield and a number of sponsors, and we found a company in there called Reply.ai. And this is a first example of how you can help accelerate innovation for a client. With Reply.ai, we created something called BotBot. And we'll show the video, and you can see immediately how these things lead into how clients can jumpstart innovation.
Every big brand is building a chatbot. Bots help companies reach more people, sell more, and offer better customer service. Problem is, building a bot takes hundreds of hours. Coding, natural language processing, content mapping, testing, artificial intelligence, quality assurance, testing, bot deployment knowledge. All this costs money, which big businesses can afford, but small businesses can't. That's why the people at Reply.ai, a startup that builds chatbots, created me. I'm BotBot, the bot that builds bots. I can help small business owners with no technical expertise build messenger bots in just 5 minutes from their phones.
That's awesome!
I know, right? Here, I'll show you how. First, pick a bot template that fits your small business best. Like a fitness bot that books classes at gyms and fitness studios. Or an answer bot that answers your customers' most common questions. Or the food bot that helps with food delivery. So, let's say you have a restaurant. We chat on Messenger to create your bot. You can give it a name, connect it to the restaurant delivery service like Eat Street. Define the details of your service, and integrate your bot smoothly into your business. Finally, we publish it on your restaurant's Facebook page. And just like that, it's alive! Now anyone can order food from your bot. BotBot turns what used to be a complex and expensive development process into a simple conversation, and a simple conversation into new business.
Thanks, BotBot.
You're welcome, welcome.
Thank you. One more example of disruptive innovation. LA Dodger's been a long-term partner. We've done 2 programs with them and planning to do some ones in the future. But for a program we did with them last year, we actually curated the startups. We found 3 companies that had never even heard of each other, never worked together, didn't know anything about each other. But if you actually put them together in combination, they can unlock potentially a multi-billion-dollar business opportunity. And that is in this area of what we call autonomous broadcast. Imagine all the sports events that a big film crew can afford to go in. Now imagine that for every one of those, there's thousands of other ones where there's an audience, but there is no financial model to send a crew in. What if you could do that autonomously? So you put these 3 companies together and you have an autonomous broadcast network. We put them together in the program, we brought Fox Sports in, and we did the pilot you're about to see in this video.
This year, at a college basketball tournament in Kansas City, something happened that will forever change the way sports is broadcast. 2 of the most innovative startups in sports, Shot Tracker and Keymotion, were brought together to create the world's first autonomous broadcasting network. Its goal, lower production costs to where every game, from high school to the pros, can be shot and broadcast at the same professional level. While a traditional network would typically use over 15 cameras and a few dozen staff to cover a game, we use just 2 small unmanned Keymotion cameras to capture the entire tournament. The cameras were directed by a custom algorithm that analyzed player movement, determining where the camera should focus and how it should frame the action. Game score and shot clock are integrated into the video in real time. While the cameras were automatically following play, shoe sensors, a Shot Tracker-enabled ball, and court sensors captured the complete stats of every player and ball movement. Every game was then streamed live on Fox Sports, automatically broadcasting coverage like, how did the rivals match up? How many three-pointers were made? How many dribbles did he take? And how far away was the player when he shot the game winner? And because every dunk, assist, and block is captured in real time, coaches can analyze players' performances during the game and make adjustments. 31 broadcast-ready games were created without using one statistician or camera operator. All it took was 2 unmanned cameras, a court sensor, a connected ball, and a shoe sensor to give fans more access to data and stats than most professional broadcasts. This is the world's first autonomous sports broadcasting network.
The last point I'll make about Ventures is that we've been at this for less than 4 years, and we're really one of the only agencies, I think the only one, that's really founded a program like this. And even within less than 4 years, we're ranked in the top 15 of the top accelerator programs in the world, according to Seed Rankings, which just came out 2 weeks ago. So that's Ventures. I'm now going to turn the floor over to Sunil. We've been talking about how to innovate from the outside using startups. We're now going to turn and talk a little bit about how you innovate from the inside with a new take on consulting. Sunil.
Thanks, Barry. Yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we are attempting to design for disruption of the traditional consulting industry. Clearly, if you look around the festival, we have 2 industries that I would say colliding, but have collided, right? Between management consultants and marketing services. And both have really talented people, but have historically kind of done different things. So our focus, when we talk about our consulting business, is fully tied just to innovation, right? There's a lot of things management consultants do for the C-suite that we don't do, frankly, that we're not capable of. And when we focus on just this, we find that our offerings kind of fall in these 4 different camps: business transformation, brand tech consulting, and organizational design. So organizational design is the creation of new innovation capabilities inside of a client. And as a guy who's had the word innovation on his business card for a lot of years, if there's one thing I've kind of figured out, it's no one likes to ask like what the definition of it is. So I wanted to kind of share ours, which is really simple, which is innovation is the introduction of the relevant and new. And we actually designed our whole process and our approach and team around this really simple definition. It's actually just a tweak of the dictionary definition, which is the introduction of something new, but we've added that keyword relevant. And relevant is actually incredibly important when you're helping a big client, right? It isn't just, there's new technologies out there, let's pursue them, or let's copy startups. You have to start from your positions of strength. If you're going to identify where your growth is going to come from as a big company, you have to figure out what's relevant to you. Your financial assets are a part of that. Your distribution could be a part of that. Your brand could be a part of that. And so identifying what's relevant is that first kind of step we take of just what is our jumping off point. In that parable of David and Goliath, it's, Goliath actually has a tremendous number of advantages, and that's one of the lessons in it. And then we actually jump to the future and just start, after we apply a level of commercial strategy to make sure we're pursuing a market that's big enough, that's interesting enough, that we think we can capture a certain percentage of, we have the right assets to achieve it, we start actually making what the experiences are. What are those new things? If you ever finish a consulting assignment as a company and you look at a 100-page deck and you don't know what to do next, that's a failed assignment. You haven't innovated yet. And so we really do lean hard into how do we make this thing. Our team is all designed as consultants that make. So how do we actually deliver on things, learn on them, bring them to life, help storytell? Then we actually go back and focus on the technologies. In the example that I'm going to show you here in a minute, you'll find out that technology happened to be machine learning based. But that technology is the last step in this process. Then we can start iterating our way through it, figuring out what the roadmap is for that client to bring them to those future states and change it along the way. So we actually did this with a company called Bradesco, which is a very large bank, one of the largest banks in Brazil. The work I'm about to show you is out of our Sao Paulo office, which is a fantastic office in the network. And it was an interesting ambition, and I love their ambition, which is, it wasn't about building a digital bank. Every bank is making a digital bank. It was actually, how do we make a bank from the ground up that's built for digital natives? If you've grown up with digital services in your life, you have service expectations that historically the banking industry doesn't deliver on, right? You expect a certain level of customer service. If you're being charged on transactions as a punishment for not having enough money at a certain time, you see that as negative. The industry is not built for you. We actually uncovered an amazing stat about millennials while researching this market opportunity, which is 71% of millennials prefer going to the dentist than a bank location. It's like that's a sign that clearly the industry has a set of challenges. But the reality is, if you're speaking to people so early in their kind of financial lives, just doing transactions with them and nickel and diming them can't be how we make money. So we have to change their business model. And so I want to show you kind of the simple approach we took to that. There's a lot of data behind this, but again, just to express it simply. Over the course of someone's financial life cycle, generally when they first get a job, they're living in these 30-day cycles. And those 30-day cycles are managing, you don't make as much money as you kind of need to live, so you have these moments of tension. But then over time, you start making more money, more than it takes to the cost of living, and then you start having aspirations. You set goals. You're in the growth phase. And then, of course, you approach retirement and you focus on protecting what you've saved. And actually, what we've attempted to do with this new bank is growing with someone over the course of that entire life stage. It's not a bank for one part of your life, it's a bank for your life. And clearly, with machine learning's capabilities, we think that's possible long term. So built from the ground up, technology, brand, experience, everything you're seeing came out of this group. It is got the behavior built into it along that life cycle. On top of that, it enables this new business model. So it's more service-based as we grow with you and monetize the audience when we know they actually could use our services versus punishing them for when they got trapped by them. So the bank is called Next, and I'll show you a little video about it.
Hang Cargo jackets, keep them by my side. Ready to go. Ready to go to fire zone. I was the reason why you didn't learn. Is this too much for you? Hey, you, wait a silence. You come after me. I know you try to be polite, but leave that thing for me. We don't know, but here we go. Wait till stop his face against the floor. Tell me the same old story about your life. I got a lot to manage just to be myself. Ready to go. Ready to throw the fire stone. I was the reason why you didn't learn. Is this too much for you? Ready to go. Ready to go now. I was the reason why you didn't learn. Is this too much for you? There's no return, baby, unless we're two. Makeup and sparkle jackets, keep them by my side. I'm ready to go. Ready to go now. I was the reason why you didn't learn. Is this too much for you? Ready to go. Ready to go. I'm the reason why you didn't learn. Is this too much? Is this too much for you? Too much for you.
Everything in Brazil is sexy, even banking. Okay, so I'm in the unfamiliar position now of being the last person to present. Usually in pitches I'm the first, and the media people are scrambling to the end. Now that's going to be me. Apparently we're also in the agency business, so I'm going to talk about how we've been trying to disrupt that. We do what everyone tries to do in the agency business, right? We try to help our clients grow, right? And whether we do that with a message at a brand level or at a transaction, then that's what we're trying to do. But how we do it is best described by this, right? We help our brands capitalize on disruptive technologies and emerging behaviors. The pairing of technology and behaviors is very important because, as we know, culture creates technology, and then technology affects culture. So this symbiosis between how we live in the world and the technology we use is very important to how we approach our job. If you break it down, there are really two things that we do. We do connected communications, which sort of looks like advertising, and we do connected design, which sort of looks like product and services. Our philosophy around connected communications is, again, we capitalize on the disruption in media by creating stories that give brands a meaningful role in culture. The most disruptive media right now, and the one that's in your pocket that you're probably checking instead of listening to me, is social media, right? And if you live in social media as a brand well, then you live in culture well. So this is a relationship between media and culture, because our relationship to that media is not just with brands, it's with our friends and with ideas and what's going on. And the connected design practice is based around us capitalizing on the disruption of technology by creating experience that put people first. So Barry mentioned this, that we have all of these technology habits now. And importantly, and this has been true for us for a long time, when you design these products and services, you can't then go and buy people's use of it, like you can buy attention in the advertising world. You've got to earn it by thinking of them first. So people first, designing products around what they really care about, is a philosophy that goes deep into our creative philosophy. So there we have it. We have these two parts of what we do, the connected communications and connected design. And from a creative point of view, our organizing principle around these two things is something you may have heard of, which is stories and systems. So for us, this is how we think about all the stuff we do. We're either thinking about it from a narrative point of view, or we're thinking about it from a behavioral point of view, right? And so when we're telling stories, what we're doing is that we're taking what our client wants to say and we're pushing it down into the world. So that's why we have this sort of top-down representation of story. But when we're building a system, it's really building a system for consumers or customers to use, right? And so that's a bottom-up, an emergent sort of thing. These two things are very important. Obviously, there's a lot of power in what's going on, in interfaces and behavior. But for us, the most important thing is not just to do these things discreetly, but to combine them. So our whole philosophy around how these two things work is trying to achieve what we call whole ideas. And the definition of a whole idea is an idea that is both a message. The industry has typically done it, in recent times at least, where they figure out what the story is and then push it down into the world. We do the opposite. And then we distill that into a message. Another way to think about that is that you can't always turn a story into a behavior, right? Especially if you're using the vernacular of advertising, all these tropes of advertising, which are metaphors and they're meant to make you feel something, they don't always turn into a behavior. But when you create a behavior, you can always tell a story about that. So we've inverted this process. We start from the bottom up with behaviors, right? So I'm going to go to show you two of our clients and talk about our connected communications, examples in connected communications and examples in connected design. But in both cases, it's really important to note that they aren't just the one thing. So the work that we've been doing for the Ad Council for the last 3 years around the Love Has No Labels campaign is obviously storytelling, right? There are 3 films that you see up there. It is, in some sense, the most traditional deliverable of our industry. But they are designed to be in a system called social media. And there are certain considerations when you're telling a story that you need to be mindful of in social media, right? So these have obviously been successful. We have these 3 chapters, and they all represent 2 things that are important for us in connected storytelling or connected communications. The first thing is, if you want people to share, right, which is the currency of communications now, when I get something from you, who's a friend, I'm going to pay attention to it much more than if I get it from a brand. So engendering sharing is very important, and you do that by telling a story that the audience wants to tell, right, and then dovetailing the brand story into that. But you start with what the audience wants to tell. The second piece is you deliver into a world, right, where culture is moving very fast, and so you need to be sensitive to that. In the first film that we did here with the Dancing Skeletons, it was leading up to the Marriage Equality Act, the argument that was going on in America about that. The second one was released in the 4th of July, the following 4th of July, when people were asking themselves, what does it mean to be a patriot? And John Cena, this square-headed white fella, was talking about it loving your country and loving all the people in the country, most of whom don't look like him. And the last one, which was set in Orlando at the NFL Pro Bowl, which is this cathedral of masculinity, was months after one of the worst hate crimes in the history of America, with the gay massacre in the nightclub. So I'm going to show you that film now.
I got a crick in my neck, limp in my step, cramping in my muscles every time I try to flex. But I'm scared of. It's very sad, but I can do this. But remember you don't know why you just stay now. But if you throw me love, I'll throw you some more. Let me show cruelty, though I may make mistakes. Don't let me show ugliness, though I know I can hate. And don't let me show evil, though it might be all I take. Show me love, show me love, show me love. Our love gets better every day.
Our friendship has no religion.
Love is about who you are and not what you are.
I don't see a wheelchair. I see the love of my life.
Our love is greater than anyone's hate.
So that's Connected Communications. Our connected design practice has gone through a bunch of generations with one of our oldest clients, which is Nike. Started off with the website, web design, which is basically hyperlinks, brochures. Is this working? There we go. And it evolved as the web evolved and ingested the world, right? So it became a customizing tool for us, so you could design your own shoe. And then about 10 years ago, we helped design one of the first IoT mass products in Nike Plus, where a park tracked your running. And then that evolved into a smartphone app, and then wearable devices. And now it is basically the ecosystem that Barry was talking about to help athletes perform. But Barry also mentioned in the playbook a very important thing, an evolution of what we've been doing for Nike, which is this arc heads towards membership, a sort of relationship that Nike has now with its customers that is all about enabling performance. It looks more like a membership, and it's come down to something which I'm about to show you, the next case study, which is a real one-to-one relationship, a one-to-one ability for Nike to help you get better. So it's all very well to have a vision about what the future could be, but the hard bit is actually making the shit happen, okay? And that's what I'm going to talk about in this last section. I'm going to talk about a few frameworks that I've noticed that RGA has sort of implemented when it comes to implementing against disruption. The most important thing, Bob mentioned at the front, don't wait to change. If you wake up in the morning and you're making money from a legacy business, it's already too late. And the time to change is when you're on top because you've got money to pay for that change, right? The second thing is you've got to change from the bottom up. And what I mean by that, so if a company is a pyramid, right, the foundation is a structure. What are you structured to make? How are you structured as a company, right? And it's on top of that structure that you put people. Now, one of the things that I've noticed through these painful reinventions, and Bob mentioned this, you know, when we went from being a production company to an agency, is that you got to get the structure right first before you get the people in. Because once you get the structure right, you know how the people fit in, right? And I think that it's hard to do because changing a structure is a lot harder than just hiring people or firing people. Changing a structure is very painful, but it's important, and it's something that I think the agency world has cheated on, right? A lot of big traditional agencies have found it difficult to change because they've thought that they could change by getting the right people. A whole generation of really smart digital thinkers that I grew up with went to big agencies and got put on top of a structure that didn't have the ambitions that they had, and they failed, even though they were brilliant. Once you get that right, then the process sorts itself out. What we find is because we do so many different things and we do them differently for each client, we can't have a process that is too restrictive. We need to rely on the ingenuity of our people on the right structure to figure out the process. That's also an important piece when you consider the thing that Sunil talked about, which is as consultants come into our space, you have to remember that consultants have historically sold process, right? And if you sell process, you can scale it and it mitigates risk. That's all great for a lot of things. It's not good for creativity, right? Process kills creativity. That's one of the big challenges for consultants as they come into our space, right? So this last framework is if these changes happen from the bottom up, they also represent a series of capabilities. In the time that I've been at RGA, I've seen at least a dozen capabilities go from zero to being mature. We're always adding new capabilities and we're connecting them to the company. And you always start, when you create capabilities, as an amateur. You just get started. So we've started many things like data visualization, consulting, ventures. We even started about 6 years ago to do this thing called advertising. We started to do narrative advertising. We started to create TV spots. This was a new thing for us. When we started, we were rubbish. We had bad people, we did bad stuff, but we had to get through it. You always have to get through the shit, right? Until you get competent, until you get pretty good at something. So at some point, maybe it was a few years in, we got as good as like a mid-sized agency in New Zealand, right? And then, once we had got to that point when we were competent, we could then connect it to the rest of the agency and the rest of the company. And once you do that, that's when you innovate. You innovate because you connect to a company that has all sorts of different ways of thinking. And in the case of storytelling, for example, as I explained before, how that affected our storytelling is that we had storytellers working with experienced designers, and experienced designers think about the user first. And as a storyteller, when you start to think about the audience first, then you come up with this sort of bottom-up storytelling. So that's how you innovate, right? And, so as I said, you have these visions, we have these ideas, you go through the pain of these things, of building these capabilities over time. It could take a year, it could take 3 years, so the inspiration is great, but you got to have tenacity. It's really fucking hard work. The thing that I would say about Bob is he's a tough old bastard, and he just keeps coming back for more, and you've got to do that, right? You've got to have the vision and the tenacity, and I'm going to hand it over to Bob now to end the presentation.
I'll just be a minute or so. One thing is, I just came back not too long ago from our Sao Paulo new connected office, and that's a beautiful thing on its own. But I went with the president of Bradesco, and you saw that in the consulting part of Sunil's presentation, to the campus of Bradesco. I have to say it's about twice the size of the Nike campus, and I've been there a lot. That's very interesting because they are, which you guys have to realize, entrusting their bank and their new future banking system to RGA. Think about that for a minute. They're not a small company, that's for sure. You can look them up. I believe they're on the New York Stock Exchange as well. I want to thank Nick. What you've seen is RGA and its ability to build a new model in order to avoid disruption. We change our model often to make sure that we're remaining innovative. No matter how technology changes and shifts, we want to be sure that we're doing all the type of work that our clients need to grow their businesses. In other words, we've designed a company that continues to evolve. That's why we changed RGA's tagline to Connected by Design. It speaks to the way we connect diverse disciplines to create innovative work and how we've designed a company that collaborates across our network. We have 20 offices, and our commitment to great design overall, because great design, complicated things can become understandable with great design. We want to see the entire industry represented at Cannes Grow and Thrive. To do so, it's imperative that we stay ahead of the disruptive forces. It's the only way that our industry will remain relevant, and thank you very much.